Okay, hi there, guys. I'm gonna see. I think everything's working. I've got my microphone going today. I've got my webcam going. If you're here and you're joined, then let me know. I see at least one person's here. A couple people are here. Great. So introduce yourself in the chat if you want to, or if you'd rather be incognito, then feel free to not say who you are and just be a voyeur and watch. Hi, Alma. Nice to see you. Wonderful that you joined. And Alma is in the lovely Bryant Park. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start this live video because the other thing I'm just testing out and trying today is I'm going to be live on Facebook for this wine tasting too, so that people can kind of see and join from there and see what it's like. The audio on Facebook is definitely not going to be as good, but you guys should be able to get good audio even though I'm outside for this tasting like you are, Alma, because I have my microphone pointed towards me. But we are in the urban space of Brooklyn, so it's very likely that, okay, good, I'm glad the audio is great. It's very likely that there'll be some car alarms and sirens and all sorts of things that go by. So if you haven't already, go ahead and open your wine. And if you happen to have, today we're tasting two wines, if you guys recall. We've got a Riesling and a Chablis, two white wines that both demonstrate really beautiful minerality. So if you haven't already, go ahead and open the wines. I recommend you get a wine glass ready for each wine that you're going to taste. So if you bought one of the wines, which is totally fine, then you just need one wine glass per person. If you planned on tasting both the wines and you got both of them, then make sure you have 2 glasses per person. If you do. If not, the other trick is make sure you just pour a little bit. We want to pour taste, so that way you can reuse the wine glass when we go to the second wine. And you don't end up with a full glass, so you've got to chug all of a sudden when we get to the second one. So I'm going to go ahead and pour the Riesling. That's the one we're going to taste first into your glass, so that as I give you a little bit of the introduction and things like that, I'll remove this out of the way. So as I do some of the introduction, you can at least be tasting wine. So cheers. Thank you so much for joining me. And we have a beautiful, warm summer day here, which is just perfect to be drinking your Riesling. Hi, Bina. Glad you joined. So take a smell of the wine, take a sip, and just enjoy it. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the background for this tasting. Cheers. So this wine tasting I thought of because I was doing a video, a YouTube video that you guys can see on my channel about how when we taste wine, a lot of times we taste something and we identify something, but it's hard to put words to that a lot of times. And one of the classic phases that even people who've worked in wine for a long time and studied it have a lot of hard time with is the concept of minerality in wines. And you'll see that on a lot of descriptions of wines on the back of wine bottles, or when you're going to buy a bottle of wine, it'll say, oh, this wine has beautiful minerality. And if you have no idea what they're talking about, it's hard to know, is this something that I would like or not like? Where does it come from? And just even what does it mean? And this is something you really can't learn by reading a book. You've got to taste it. And the best thing to do is to taste it with an expert. And that's really the best way to learn and figure out exactly what minerality is. And then today I chose to taste just white wines. We're going to taste just white wines with minerality because that is really the best way to isolate minerality. When you have red wines, there's so many other things going on in the red wines. There's a lot more complexity. There's tannins and things like that that can kind of confuse the issue. So I find that in white wine, it's a little bit purer to identify the minerality, and we're taking baby steps on all this. Maybe we'll have a version 2 of this tasting where we have red wines and things like that at a different time. But for now, we're going to do white wines with minerality. And if you guys recall, everyone who RSVP'd and signed up for this tasting, I sent them a shopping list of a Riesling and a Chablis to buy. So we're going to start with the Riesling. First thing, I'll just take you through a quick reminder of how to taste wine. You've already sipped it and tasted it the way you normally would. So now let's sip it the wine taster's way, which, if you recall, is to swirl the wine, give it a really good swirl so that it aerates the wine and all of the smelling compounds of the wine kind of really activate. That's the whole purpose of why we swirl. And then give it a sniff. It smells so good. And you'll see that you probably smelled a lot more in the wine than you did when it was still, because now all of that smelling compounds are volatilized, or they're more intense. And then sip the wine taster's way, which is to suck in the air and really send some of the aromas up through your nose so you can smell it as you taste it. And this part is especially important when you are tasting for minerality, because minerality is something that is a combination of both smells, textures, and kind of flavors too, or at least a mouth feeling in your palate. So a lot of times, you know, when you say a wine smells like cherries or strawberries or banana or whatever it is, that component isn't actually in the wine, right? You guys know that. It's not like they added in bananas to the wine or they added in strawberries to the wine, and that's why the wine smells like those things. Really, the wine smells like that because it has some of the same chemical composition as a strawberry or as a banana. So it's the same thing with minerality in the wines. The actual mineral content of the wine isn't really that big, but instead you're getting certain smelling compounds. You're getting certain things that have a feeling to them in your mouth, and that is providing the experience that is minerality. So now let me back up a second and talk about, like, well, what is minerality? Because the probably the typical thing that people think of when they hear about minerality is like rocks. Or like, I don't know, minerals that you mine for or something like that. And it's kind of like, well, if you've ever tasted a rock, which I have done as research for my wine tasting career, I've tasted, you know, just like licked a rock that was clean. And sometimes my daughter likes to make stone soup, so we stick a stone in our vegetable soup and stuff, but it doesn't really have a taste to it. So what is minerality if it's not actually tasting like rocks? And by the way, at this point, if anybody has in chat, if you guys have ideas about what minerality is, or any preconceived notions, then you can feel free to type it in or whatever. But I'll tell you that it's something that the more you taste and the more you do this thing, you'll be able to start identifying it. And it is something that is not sweet. It's not the fruit in the wine. It's not the floral in the wine. Okay, somebody says, like fresh spring water, kind of. Exactly. That is actually one of the homework assignments that I'm going to give you guys after this tasting if you want to experience minerality. Hi, Sam. Is that you can go out and buy some mineral waters and taste that alongside a non-mineral water, like ideally a really purified water, and you're going to be able to taste some of the difference in that. And it's non-fruit, it's non-floral, and it's non-oak. So if you guys are used to tasting wines with oak in them, you get like vanilla, caramel, nutmeg, things like that, a lot of the buttery flavors and stuff like that. So if you isolate out all of those things, there is still kind of a flavor in the wine. And for those of you who have ever had mineral salts, like Celtic sea salt or something like that, or even sometimes you get it in seaweed or oysters, there's kind of like a brininess, rockiness, sometimes even a chalkiness. So think about that, kind of even close your eyes and get a smelling or a taste recollection of that. And then I want you to taste the wine again. We're tasting the Riesling now. And see if there aren't some of the characteristics of that you're able to taste in the wine. This is a German Riesling, and in Germany there's a lot of slate in the vineyards, and all sorts of different minerals and things like that. And some people say that the mineral taste in the wine might come from those vineyards. But mineral, I think, is a good tasting thing to say and be able to sort of identify where a wine comes from. So you guys have all seen when you see an expert wine taster, or you've heard maybe of an expert wine taster, and they can taste a wine and they can tell you where it's from. And you're like, how on earth can they do that? Like, how is that even possible? Well, this is one of the ways, this is one of the tricks that they're able to tap into in order to figure out where a wine comes from, is to really taste for this minerality and get a sense for, and you're gonna taste, we have two wines, right? We have the Riesling and then the Chablis. And when you have both of those two, you can taste that, okay, there's some similarity of mineral, but the mineralness of them is different. So in the German Riesling, there's more of a slate kind of minerality to it. And then when we taste the Chablis, it actually has a lot more of like the seashell, chalky minerality to it. So even when we say minerality in the wine business, there's a huge range of what that can mean. So I hope this is starting to make sense. You guys should feel free. One of the best things about doing a live tasting is that you should ask your questions if anything doesn't make sense. This is why it's better, I think, than just doing a video, watching one of my wine videos where it's just one way and I'm talking and maybe I lose you at some point and you're not sure what I'm saying. But when we do these live tastings, you're able to ask questions and say like, okay, stop, hold on a second. I wasn't following you there, or I'm not sure what this term means, because of course I've worked in wine far, far too long. So at this point, I forget what people do and don't know, and maybe I'm not sure what would be new to you. So good. All right, this is great. We got a big audience growing between Facebook and YouTube here, so this is fun. So with the Riesling, there is definitely some fruit that I can smell and taste in this. There's kind of like some lemony notes to it. There is definitely like a mouth-watering characteristic to it. Sometimes actually in this one I get like almost like a nectarine kind of flavor also. And there are all those things. So that's the fruit you can call upon and think about. And then, as is typical in a lot of Rieslings, there's something else that people describe as diesel. And it's actually kind of, there's like a petroleum, like if you're hanging out at the gas station, there's a little bit of a smell of that. Not a strong one. Oh, I love it. Alma says, Riesling feels and tastes like a happy summer. And I totally agree. This is why it's such a great summertime wine. And so there's all those things going on in the Riesling. And then on top of that, see if you can taste and identify that other characteristic, whether it's the oysters that recall it for you, mineral spring water, or sea salt, like a Celtic sea salt. And by the way, those are all of your homework, is to go out and taste those things. And then the next time you have, especially a German Riesling, a Chablis, and I'll mention in my follow-up email to this some of the other wines that you can find minerality and look for it in. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to the Chablis for those of you who have it. And by the way, like I said, if you only bought one of the wines or if you have none of the wines, that's totally, totally fine. I think you can still get a lot out of this tasting. But you can just experience it and hear about the wine. But I do recommend, there's absolutely nothing better than learning about wine than actually tasting. It's like riding a bike. Someone can describe it all they want, but unless you actually get up and like get your legs moving on the pedals and things like that, it's really hard to know. Okay, so now we have the Chablis. Quick refresher on what Chablis is. Chablis is actually a place. So like Champagne or Chianti or a lot of the wines from Europe, the wine is named according to the region where it's from. And Chablis is part of the Burgundy region of France. It's actually one of the most northern parts of the region. And the floor, the soils and things like that are all remnants from when this part of the world was under the ocean. It was actually part of the sea floor. And so the wines there, I think, do pick up some of those flavors and some of those notes of like, something having to do with the ocean, whether it's like the smell and taste of seashells or oysters or whatever. It's one of the things that makes it, sorry for the planes flying overhead, but it's one of the things that also makes it so good with seafood. So if you're ever looking for a good wine to go with your oysters or your fish, you just can't go wrong with the Chablis. Or anybody's having some summer lobster. Great. So give this one a swirl. And even in this one, you can already smell. I didn't smell the minerality as much with the Riesling, but when I smell this wine, I really get a smell of like that chalkiness. And like I said, it's the thing that is more saline or savory. It's non-sweet, and it's non-oak, and it's non-floral. So if you kind of isolate out those things and you smell the wine and you think about what's left, you might be able to pick up some of this minerality. Okay. Oh, this is a great wine that is very representative of Chablis and of minerality, because there isn't a lot of that oak treatment or other things. And Chablis, by the way, the grape variety in Chablis is Chardonnay. But if you had a Chablis alongside, let's say, California Napa Valley Chardonnay, you wouldn't even know they're the same grape variety. I have a Just Add Wine tasting party kit that, if you guys haven't seen, it's on my website, Life in Vino. And on there, it's everything you need to be able to host your own wine tasting party and do it yourself and put it together. And it includes a video, in addition to a shopping list and recipes and things like that. There's also a video that takes you through the tasting. And one of the things we do is we taste 2 Chardonnays from very different regions, and you taste them side by side. And every single time I do this tasting with people, people are always shocked. They're like, I thought I didn't like Chardonnay. And then they taste the French version of Chardonnay, like a Chablis or something like that. And they're like, oh, I kind of like Chardonnay. Like, it's so refreshing. It's very different. It's not as sweet or heavy-handed as a lot of times what people think of as Chardonnay. I don't know if this is offensive or not, but I will say that there's a name in the wine business. A lot of people call Chardonnay cougar juice. I don't know what that means. I guess a lot of people of a certain age range and demographic drink Chardonnay. But I think Chardonnay got a bad rap because it's one of the finest wines on earth. So, tasting this Chablis. And are you guys starting to, I think one of the things I like about having 2 different wines that both have some minerality in them is that you start to pick up on, like, obviously these are 2 different wines, a Riesling, a Chardonnay, a Chablis, a wine from Germany, but there's a lot of differences, but there's also some similarities to the wines as well, and some of that similarity is really the minerality. I'm going to pause for a second and just make sure anybody has any questions or anything like that. Let's see. Okay. Well, you guys can feel free to type in questions as they come. The other thing that I'll say about minerality in wines is that it's a really good way of identifying the difference between old world wines and new world wines. Anybody who's been to one of my wine tastings knows that I talk about this a lot, but new world wines are wines from places like California or Australia, countries and regions that are a little bit newer to winemaking, as opposed to the very old world winemaking countries, especially France and Italy and places like that, where they're making wines for a very long time. And in those places, the wines tend to be about the place, the location, and bringing out what people call the terroir, or the earth, the place. And versus the New World winemaking places where they have a lot of great technology for the winemaking. And this is a broad generalization. But in the New World winemaking countries, they use a lot of technology and things like that. So the wine is a lot more about the wine making and the techniques, as opposed to trying to bring out the place. And that's also kind of the way the wines are named. Like we mentioned with Chablis, the wine's named according to the place where it's from, Chablis. And it's really about bringing out that characteristic of Chablis. So when you first start tasting wine and you're blind tasting it, especially when I've taken like some of the wine exams and things like that, what you do is you do something called funneling. You don't just start out and taste a wine. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you just start out and taste a wine. You're like, that's a German Riesling from the Mosel, blah, 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 blah. And you get all the stats down. But sometimes what happens instead is you start out with like generalities. Like you might say, this is an old world wine versus a new world wine. And all of a sudden you've cut out 50% of the world. Now, how is this useful to you guys because you're not doing your own blind tasting? Well, it's useful because when you're in a wine store and you're trying to figure out what kind of wine you're going to like, or if you're at a restaurant and you're trying to figure out what kind of wine to order, once you start to get a feeling for these things and figure out like, oh, you know, I really tend to gravitate towards old world wines, or I gravitate towards new world wines, then it's really helpful to be able to describe to somebody what you like, or just choose the wines yourself, because you're going to be more likely to like the wines as opposed to just going with the grape variety. Like I said, Chardonnay can taste so different if it's from one place versus another. So it's more helpful to know, well, do I like the old world style of making wines that may be more focused on the minerality and things like that? Or do I like the more new world wine making? Similar for cool weather versus warm weather wines. And that's a whole separate tasting that you can buy my kit and do yourself, or maybe one day we'll do a video about that too. Quick plug, if you guys aren't already signed up for my email list, it's free to do that. Sign up on at lifeinvino.com, and you'll get my emails and you'll know whenever I'm doing one of these live tastings, and then you'll be able to buy the wines in advance and you'll be able to taste alongside of me, which I think is, you know, Alma can probably attest to the fact that it's way better and it's more exciting when you're able to actually taste the wine alongside me, and you'll have wine with you. So that's clearly going to be better. Okay, so I'm trying to think about if there's anything else I wanted to cover. I'll give you guys a second too if you want to ask any questions. We talked about the Celtic sea salt. So your homework assignments are to go out and taste Celtic sea salt, to taste mineral spring water, and either oysters or like seashells or something like that, to smell and get a sense of the flavor profile of those things, and then to go back and taste a Riesling from Germany, especially the Mosel, if you can find one of those, Chablis, wines from the Loire Valley. A lot of those wines are going to show a beautiful amount of minerality, and see if you guys can take those things and then taste the wine and see if you can get it. I think it's really hard, at least for me, to taste a wine and be like, oh, I taste blah, blah, blah. I taste, you know, fresh cut grass. But it's a lot easier if you familiarize with yourself with something, and then you look for that in the wine, and you're kind of, I learned this in the video I did with the food scientist really recently. What you're doing is your language center of your brain is in a different place in your brain, like location-wise, than the center that experiences smells and tastes. So when you make this link between things, even going to the grocery store or the florist or whatever and smelling something and saying the name to yourself and kind of saying like, okay, this is an orange. This is what orange smells like. Vanilla, this is what vanilla smells like. You can do that in your spice cabinet. You are creating new neural pathways for your brain, and that is what's going to allow you to become a better wine taster, to be able to identify some of these smells, which of course, the whole point of that is so that you can then go out and describe the wine you like to a sommelier or a retailer, or read the backs of labels and find more wines you like. You know, that's really my style of teaching wine. Is the whole purpose of all of this is to help you guys enjoy it more. And I also think this is one of the ways that, you know, like people always say to me, like, Dini, you don't actually drink that much wine. Like, I don't drink a huge volume of wine. I like to taste a lot of different things, and I can really even be satisfied with a pretty small glass of wine, because for me, I really savor and take in every sip, and I just relish it, is the best way of saying it. And when you do that, a little bit goes a long way, which helps with the morning after headaches and things like that too. But this is really kind of the life in vino way, and then you can find more wines you like. So I covered what your homework is. We talked about where does minerality come from. Yeah, that would be a very nice controversial topic. If you guys are ever visiting a winery and talking to a winemaker, you could be like, where do you think minerality comes from? And I've seen a lot of hotly debated rooms where people are like, it comes from the soils. No, it can't possibly come from the soils. It comes from this. It comes from that. where do the flavors come from in wine, it would be a whole separate video that we could do sometime. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you guys. Thank you on Facebook. Thank you on YouTube for joining. And like I said, if you're not already signed up to learn about future wine tastings, please do that. Make requests for different times when you want the tastings offered. Make requests for tastings that you would like to learn about. If you want to learn more about blah, 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 whatever it is, I'd be happy to do a tasting all for you. So let me know. Thank you so much, and cheers. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the beautiful day. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye.